Dr. Dolf De Roos, thank you so much for joining us here at EPP. I know we're socially distanced across an ocean right now, but it's still great to have you here. Thank you for making the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, first thing I wanted to ask, Dolf, for those of the guys that haven't heard of you before, etc., tell us a little bit about your favorite deal that you've done, or give us a bit of a background of one of the transactions that you particularly enjoyed.
Oh gosh, there are so many because I think real estate is so inherently enjoyable that probably every deal has been fun. But a couple come to mind, and in particular I want to talk about one I did up in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, of course, is known around the world as the gambling capital. But I always say the real jackpots are out in the suburbs, not in the casinos. Because when you think about it, when you gamble your money in a casino, your chances of winning are extraordinarily small, something like 1 in 16 million. And yet hundreds of thousands of people try that every day. And yet out in the suburbs, there are what I call jackpots. These are deals that are so stunningly good and appealing that for the life of me, I can't figure out why there aren't a couple of 100,000 people chasing those deals. But of course, the difference is that if you win one of these jackpots in the suburb, you're not going to get $40 million in one hit. But if and I once bought 52 of these in 1 year. I set out to buy one house a week for an entire year. And each of them to me was like a casino jackpot, even though they weren't $40 million values. But the reason I find these so fascinating is I could acquire them without using any of my own cash. And on top of that, they were cash flow positive on day one. So one in particular, it cost $150,000. That was the transaction price. But the interesting thing is the bank left the money in. Here in the United States, many mortgages are what's called assumable, meaning they don't go with the purchase of the home, but they stay with the home. So when the home gets sold, the mortgage stays on the property. And the owner of the property was willing to gift me the difference between the mortgage and the purchase price because he was so far underwater with that mortgage. In other words, he owed the bank money. He had a big black X against his name, and he wouldn't have been able to buy anything, let alone a house, for another 10 years. That's the way the credit rating system works here. So by me paying off the backlog of his mortgage, he was willing to gift that property to me just to get it off his back. And you might be wondering, hang on a minute, Dolf, you said that you bought it without any cash, and you just revealed that you paid off that mortgage. Well, yes, I did. But then I leased the property. I got a tenant in under what's called a lease option arrangement, which gave him the option to buy the property in the future. And for that lease option, you charge a fee, and the fee I charged him was exactly what I had to pay the bank. So the net money for me going in was zero. I had a cash flow positive asset from day one. I made about $30,000 on paper on day one. And within 2 years, that property had nearly doubled in value. It was a win-win for all. And I say for all, the bank won. They didn't have to foreclose on the property. That cost them a lot of money. But even the seller won. He didn't have that black X next to his name. His credit was restored. He got out of a situation that he was losing in, and it didn't cost him any money. And then obviously I won as well. And that's the kind of deal that, Frank, they're just out there all the time, but people don't realize it. And all that some people need is to be shown how they too can participate in deals that prior to being shown this, they would have said, but that's surely not possible, is it?
I love it. I love that win-win solution where you're helping a vendor out of a situation they'd really rather not be in. Interestingly, I love that you've identified that the bank is also approving and grateful. They've not had the inconvenience of foreclosing and selling the property, etc. And then you're making great money out of it. I've not heard the comparison with the jackpots in Las Vegas, but absolutely I agree. No money left in property or a no money down property that cash flows every single month and goes up in value over time. What could be better? It's the ultimate asset. In fact, Robert Kiyosaki, who I know you've worked with previously, his definition of an asset is something that puts money in your pocket every single month, which I absolutely agree with. So for me, Dolf, I've been in property a very short period of time. My first ever purchase was 2006. So I've only had 14 years in property. I'm reading your book, Real Estate Riches right now that was written before I'd ever bought a property. So you've got decades more experience than me. Those that listen to the podcast regularly, those that know EPP, know that we wouldn't dream of buying a property in a conventional manner. We wouldn't dream of putting down our normal size deposit, whether that's 10%, 20%, 25%, and then getting a return of 5% or 10% a year. That just wouldn't tick our criteria. But how have you seen that change over those decades? How do you see investment changing? Because I've only got this snapshot now. What's your take on sophisticated property investing?
You know, the real estate is so slow to change, it's almost boring. And the way I compare it with other investments is if you are investing in the share market or the stock market, most people have to monitor those stocks because the nature of the industries that are involved change so rapidly. You know, we had the dot-com boom of 1999, and then the dot-bomb or the bust of that, and then it was agri-stocks, and then it was medical stocks, and it's constantly changing. And most people are monitoring what's up and down, and on the stock market they're saying sell, buy, whereas when you buy real estate, you can literally buy the property and put the title to it in the bottom drawer of your desk and forget about it for a decade, and chances are it's almost a foregone conclusion. I won't say it is a foregone conclusion, but almost, that it's gone up in value substantially. In fact, to the point, Frank, that when most people retire, despite them focusing their investment efforts on stocks or bonds or certificates of deposit or futures or options or ostrich farms or anything else, for most people, their biggest asset is the home they live in. And they didn't even buy that as an investment, it was a place to live. And you'll often hear them lament, oh my gosh, if only we'd bought 2 or 3, let alone 10, when we were young, instead of all those other investments. So the nature, the fundamental nature of real estate hasn't changed. But there are some differences on the surface, and I think it's fair to say that a generation or two ago, most real estate transactions were very they conformed to this norm. Most people put 25% down and got a mortgage for the difference, and a lot of people got married and had 2.2 kids and a dog and a cat, etc., etc. And now we get many more variations on this. There are many more flavors of marriages, if you like, between different parties, and people are more transient. They move around more with job opportunities, and things are different. So maybe 70 or 80% of real estate transactions are still conforming to that norm, but others are different. And because of that increase in the number of different sorts of deals, the opportunities for doing something that is a bit out of the ordinary has just skyrocketed. And I always say the thing I love about real estate is the opportunity to beat the average in a way that I just can't beat the average in any other investment that I think of. If you want to invest in gold, not that I think gold is an investment because there's no income from it. It's just speculation, really. You buy gold in the hope, obviously, that when you get around to selling it, it's worth more than what you paid for it when you bought it. But with real estate, you obviously have the income, you have the rental income, but in addition to that, there are so many ways of doing a transaction that if you don't know about them, then you just don't know about them. It's a classic case of you don't know what you don't know. And that's why I find when people learn about real estate opportunities, a whole new world opens up to them. And they often say, why did no one teach me this before? And I say, well, I can't answer that, but I'm happy you're learning it now. And that's why I think it's incumbent on everyone to find out, why is it that most people, like you, Frank, most people that got into real estate, according to your own admission just now, relatively late, why is it that you're so passionate about it? And it's because you've seen the light. You've seen how astoundingly lucrative it can be. And that's what fires me up. It's fun teaching, but it's fun teaching something that when your students learn it, they actually feel that they're better off for it. That's a great feeling.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll tell you precisely, Dolf, why I'm fired up about property. I remember being a student, so I was at university in a town in England called Nottingham, and I remember looking at what I was paying the landlord in rent, seeing that there were 5 other people in the house sharing with me, other students, and then looking at the house next door on the market for sale and working out the profit the landlord was making for nothing, basically, and thinking, that's what I want to get into. I became a teacher for a couple of years, But within 18 months of leaving teaching, I paid myself 1 month, in 1 month, my annual salary as a teacher. And for me, that was, I'm in love with real estate forevermore. It was one deal. I didn't make it every month, but that's what's possible. It's like your description about winning the jackpot. If you get the deal right, and then of course my appetite was whetted and I started looking for more and more. So yeah, it's fascinating. Can I ask a question, Dolf? Have you seen in the States, now I think the States is a more progressive real estate investment environment than the UK. I think we're a few years behind. I think we borrow and adopt some of the stuff that you use. But have you seen the banks and institutions become more favorable, or the environment become more favorable for sophisticated investing over the decades, or has it stayed pretty much stationary and people have just upskilled themselves?
Oh gosh, that is a very tough question to answer, because firstly, I haven't lived here continuously over the decades. I have in fact lived in 13 countries. I'm not saying that to impress you, but just to highlight the fact that I've moved around a lot. So I've gotten snippets of insights into what's going on. But one thing I will say about the US market here is that it's far more involved and complicated and sophisticated, and therefore appealing to someone who's looking for anomalies than a very monolithic market. So I was born in New Zealand. New Zealand is a beautiful country. Of course, I love it there, but it's quite small. It's only got 5 million people now, and it doesn't have nearly the variety of kinds of mortgages as you do here in the States. Here we have assumable loans. We can fix our interest rate here for up to 40 years. That's unheard of anywhere else. In fact, in most countries, when you buy a property, it might be fixed for the first 2 years, or if you're really lucky, 5 years, and then it's floating. So you're at the mercy of the market. And relatively recently, interest rates have been nice and low, and they're trending downwards, which is good. So no one's worried about that. But I remember a time, Frank, when I paid 24% interest on my mortgage finance. And in case you think that's crazy, who would borrow at that rate? I borrowed with relish, because I knew that in all probability, interest rates wouldn't continue to go up the way they did, by the way, in Argentina or Israel, but they would come down. And when they came down, as interest rates came down, surely the value of properties would go up because affordability was going up. And that's indeed what happened. So, you know, I just think the market here is so expansive and so big, with so many variations and so many variables, that there are opportunities to beat the average on all fronts. And, you know, they say America's the land of opportunity, and that's sort of a cliche. But when it comes to real estate and doing anomalous real estate deals, I think it's actually true. There are tremendous opportunities here.
That is music to my ears, because I'll be honest with you, the amount, I'm a scientist by training, that's part of my approach to property, is a very methodical scientific approach, but it's also from a research perspective. So I read a lot about Australian real estate investment, and also masses on the United States real estate market and what's possible over there. And the number of times where I've read a book, got all excited about a new strategy and worked out how to implement it, gone to our lawyers here in the UK, and they've gone, Frank, you can't do that here. It doesn't work for this reason or this reason. So I'm well aware that what is possible in the US. And
oh, it really is delightful. I mean, you know, and I've done deals, as you know, in 8 countries. But here we've got a quitclaim deed document. It's just a 1-page document. You fill it out, and then suddenly the property that I own now belongs to you irrevocably. And the irony is, the mortgage that's in my name stays with me. I owe the debt and I no longer own the property. How is that possible? But it's possible.
It's amazing when you know what's possible, what you can then achieve.
Right.
So Dolf, one of the biggest objections I hear from relatively novice property investors and more experienced ones is cash flow. That's one of the biggest things that seems to hold people back. They either don't have the funds to do the marketing to find the vendors, or they don't have the funds to actually put as down payments on the properties, or to do the refurbishment and works afterwards. What's your advice? You've coached hundreds, if not thousands, of people in their real estate investing businesses. What is your advice to those guys?
Well, obviously, if you want to do a $100,000 deal, it's easier to do that deal if you've got 20 million in the bank. But for what it's worth, I never had 20 million in the bank. I started with very humble beginnings. I had to borrow all the money for my first down payment, let alone the mortgage on the first property I bought. And the thing that is great about real estate, again, that sets it apart from other investments, is even though it's easier to do a deal when you've got a lot of cash, it is possible to do a deal without any cash. Try doing that with a stock market investment. They will laugh you out of their office. So, given that, having some cash flow is good. And often a real estate deal is such that it spins off cash flow. So as you acquire more properties, you've got more cash flow coming your way. But the really great thing about having a business that's in the real estate realm, where you're helping others invest or maybe helping others get rid of properties that you want to get rid of, is that that too can generate the cash flow for you that you can then use to make further investments. And that's why it's really such a good fit to be involved with a business where you're helping other people transact property, and in the process you're earning income from that to help you with your own investing.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Dolf. And I'd like to just ask you a quite direct question. You must get offered all the time to work with different organizations, different companies, different individuals, and you've chosen to get involved with EPP to help in the launch of EPP in the States. Why is that? Why have you chosen to work with myself and our organization?
Well, it comes back to that fundamental thing of integrity. I'm big on integrity. I'm one of the few that teaches integrity. I have this passionate feeling that integrity is not genetic. So everyone has it within themselves to change their level of integrity, and to the extent they do, they will have more good things coming their way. So I get approached a lot by companies, you're right. And very often I'm either not interested, it's outside of my wheelhouse, or I don't like what they're doing, it's not real estate or something, or I check out the people. And there is a great opportunity for the sorts of deals that Ethical Property Partners does. In fact, there are already companies that in one shape, way or form do this. But what appeals to me about EPP is that from the top down, it's based on integrity. And if everyone can win in a deal, you might not make as much money as someone who's willing to go out and rob a bank, but you will be in business longer, it will feel better, you will help more people, and ultimately you'll get referrals. And one of the great tests of whether something has integrity is 2 years down the track and 5 years down the track, do people speak well of what you did and what the company did? And if that's the case, you're doing something right. And that is just how I feel about the companies that I end up agreeing to work with, is they are doing it right. And that's so crucial because, we're only on this planet for an infinitesimally small period of time in the scheme of things. In the history of the universe, it's such a small time. And do you want to have your time squandered doing something where people are really going to feel bad about you? Or would you rather do something that helps people? And I'd rather help people than do it the other way around. And this is yet another way of doing something that can benefit all parties in the transaction. It's just like, when we would do a deal where we help someone out of a bad situation, the way I described in Las Vegas. Everyone wins from that, and that feels really good. In fact, I still have people calling me from deals I did in Vegas years ago now saying, thank you so much for helping me out. I didn't take advantage of them in their eyes and steal the property from them. No, I still paid more than anyone else was willing to pay, and I saved their credit from going what we call down the gurgler, or just being destroyed. So that feels really good. So after a while, you just only want to work with people who do things right.
It's so interesting that you say that, Dolf, because I didn't know that Ian Jackson knew you. So Ian Jackson is a mutual friend of ours. Regular listeners of the EPP podcast will have heard my interview with Ian himself. And I didn't know that Ian knew you. I didn't know that you'd worked together some 10, 20 years ago. And he kept his powder dry. He started working with EPP, he came on as a franchisee, then he recognised the opportunity. He lives in Northern Ireland in Belfast. He recognised the opportunity in Ireland. He bought the rights to EPP in Ireland and is now running a very successful business there, helping others to adopt the EPP system and to build portfolios for themselves. In fact, Ian's done far more deals over the last 12 months he's been working with us than he had done in several years before. But it took best part of, I think, 9 months before he said, Frank, let me introduce you to this guy called Dolf. And that was clearly him just testing the water and checking exactly what you were talking about before putting his reputation on the line and saying, Dolf, you want to chat to Frank? So yeah, I can see that entirely. And interestingly, I was keen to meet with you because that referral had come from Ian, because I hold him in high regard. I know he's a man of his word, etc. So,
well, that's so interesting, because Ian, I can say, is not just an acquaintance. And you can imagine I've got, thousands of acquaintances around just from the prolific work I've been doing. But he's what I'd consider, a dear friend. And we go back decades. And it tends to be whenever I'm in the UK, I try and catch up with him, and vice versa. He used to come to the Consumer Electronics Show every year, and then after that he'd fly down to Phoenix and we'd catch up. So he's a dear friend, notwithstanding the fact that I have tremendous difficulty understanding him because of his accent. And I also know he's got integrity, because Ian went through a few challenges, and yet he never did wrong by anyone. He stuck it out until he resolved everything. So I've got a lot of respect for Ian. And that's why, just to blow smoke his way a bit, when he said I should look at this, I thought, okay, this is serious, I will. So yes, it's one of those things, and that's the great thing, again, about doing things with integrity. You start to know whom you can trust, and that's just a great feeling.
And here we are, 3-4 months later from that introduction, launching EPP in the States, speaking to really highly qualified potential master franchisees to run states. We chatted to a guy last week who's done 4,500 transactions, and all of that has come from that one introduction from Ian. So yeah, exciting times, Dolf, for sure. Before we wrap up, I cannot let you leave, Dolf, without asking you a bit about the people you've worked with. So we are big subscribers to Kaizen, continuous, never-ending improvement of ourselves, of our businesses. The guys on EPP read prolifically. And when you told me some of the names, I'm going to do it to save you embarrassment. I'm going to share some of the names of the people you've worked alongside, you've talked for, you've been on stage alongside. Those are massive names in the industry. What I want to ask you about these people is, what have you learned most from each of them, if I may be so bold, Dolf? So you've worked alongside Tony Robbins, you've worked alongside Robert Kiyosaki, you presented with Jim Rohn, many others, I'm sure. Would you share a few anecdotes or a few stories about those? Because we only see the printed word. Jim Rohn is no longer with us. Tony Robbins is pretty hard to sit down and have a coffee with these days. But these people, you've worked with them. Give us a bit of an insight, Dolf.
Oh gosh, that is such a broad, open topic, and we could spend hours about that. You mentioned Jim Rohn. He would have to be one of the nicest people I've ever met. Just genuine, heartfelt, happy. He had a happy soul. He passed away 5th of December, a few years ago now. A great loss to the world. He's the granddaddy of the public speaking world, if you like. But he just had good intent. And one of the common denominators from those who last, because I've met many people who are no longer on the circuit. They either burnt out or they burned other people. But Jim Rohn was there for the long haul. We were on stage together. We toured Asia, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Singapore, back in the early 2000s, and just one of the happiest people there was. Another one who's no longer with us, Zig Ziglar. He's accredited with the saying, but he lived it, and I try and live by it every day. You can get whatever you want in this world as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And it is so true. It's, when you give, ultimately it will come back to you. And both of them were very happy. They spoke highly of their friends. Zig Ziglar is notorious for praising his redhead, his wife. So there's that. And then, I feel really privileged having worked with a lot of these people, and a lot of them sought me out. That's what I find is the interesting thing. But Tony Robbins, he really cares about the people he works with, and he's a master at the art. So it's just been a pleasure, the road I've traveled, getting the honor and the opportunity to teach at some of his events. Where do we go from this? I'm the biggest student. So even though I might appear on stage supposedly as a teacher, I think I'm the biggest student there, because even when I'm on stage and speaking to 3,000 people, they listen to one person, but I get the collective feedback from 3,000 people just by the reactions to things, and by how focused they are. You get a sense of where this audience is at. Do they like real estate or not? And there is a difference between countries. Some countries nationally are passionate about real estate. You know, down under in Australia and New Zealand, buying real estate is a true passion, and in other countries it's shunned. France, for instance, they've of course got a high tax on real estate, and it's not as popular there. But notwithstanding that, it also makes it fascinating to try and turn these audiences around. So it's just fascinating, and the people I've enjoyed working with most are not the people who are professional teachers, but it's the people who actually do what they say they do, and they are willing to share their message. So they live their own message. And unfortunately in real estate, there are sometimes people who come on board who think, oh, there's money to be made in teaching real estate. So they learn a few basics so that they can get up on stage and teach it and hopefully make their money that way. So one of the questions I want to leave you with, Frank, that everyone should ask is, when you ask someone for advice on anything, ask yourself, does this person earn the bulk of his or her money by selling advice, or do they earn the bulk of their money by doing the very things they're encouraging you to do? And the answer to that question tells you how much credence to give their advice. And again, one of the things I love about EPP and what you're doing is that you yourself are an ardent investor. You didn't see this as a business opportunity, and you didn't care whether it was ostrich farming or berry farming or selling tickets to the moon on future moon trips. No, you're a passionate investor, and you've figured out a way of making it available to more people. That tells me a lot about how much people should listen to your message.
Thank you, Dolf. Thank you. And for those of you listening, those of you watching, if this interview with Dolf has resonated, if you are sat there, you're an experienced property investor in the States, and you think, do you know what, I'd like to work with Dolf and Frank to help people to access real estate, sophisticated real estate investments in my state, I'd like to do that, then do get in touch with us, guys, and we would love to have a chat and to see if we can move that forward. Dolf, thank you so much for your time, sir. Thank you so much for your abundance and your wisdom. I'm looking forward to the journey ahead. It's going to be fun.
Likewise, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.